This is episode 20, where we ask, what should education look like in a world where change is the only constant? I mean, it really feels like humankind is standing right at the edge of something massive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We're seeing these huge, unprecedented revolutions reshaping everything. And, well, our old stories, the ones about how the world worked, they feel like they're kind of crumbling. But we haven't really found a new story yet to, grab onto.
Yeah.
So based on the sources you've brought for this deep dive, how do we even start preparing ourselves or our kids for this future? This future just packed with rapid change and really radical uncertainty. What skills, what knowledge is actually going to matter in, say, 2050 or even 2100?
Yeah, and what jumps out immediately from this material is just how much harder predicting the future feels now. I mean, humans have always been, let's face it, pretty bad at foresight. But today, with technology letting us engineer not just our tools, but our actual bodies, our brains, maybe even our minds, things that always felt, fixed, constant, suddenly they're incredibly uncertain.
Right. It's wild. Think about trying to predict the future 1,000 years back.
Yeah.
Like China in 1018. Okay, sure, there was political uncertainty. Maybe the Song Empire falls. Maybe invaders come. Maybe there's a plague. That was all real. But despite that, people were, well, pretty certain about the basic shape of life. They knew most jobs would be farming or weaving, armies, governments run by humans, gender roles felt fixed, life expectancy depressingly low, maybe 40, and the human body itself, that was just a given. So the schools they taught, planting rice, weaving silk, Confucian classics, calligraphy, fighting, running a home, those were clearly relevant for 1050, no question.
Exactly. That fundamental certainty, it's just like gone today. Poof.
Mm.
We genuinely have no clue what the main jobs will be in 2050, or how governments or big companies will even work, or frankly, what gender relations will look like. Lifespans might double. The very definition of human is up for grabs with things like bioengineering.
It's using biology and engineering to modify organisms,
Right.
including us.
Right. And brain-computer interfaces, tech that could literally wire our minds to machines. This level of just radical uncertainty means that a lot of what kids are learning in school right now, it might be pretty much useless in just a few decades.
Okay, so let's dig into that. What are the sources saying are the main problems with education now? The first big one seems to be this focus on just cramming information.
Yeah, and you can see why that made sense, historically speaking. Information used to be scarce, really scarce, and
Ye-
often censored. Think about that example the sources use a small town in Mexico, say 1800. What access to knowledge did they have? Almost none. Maybe a few books, likely religious or government approved. So when modern schools started teaching basic facts, geography, history, science, giving people that access, that was a huge leap forward. It was revolutionary.
But the world's completely flipped now, hasn't it?
Mhm.
In the 21st century, we're not starved for information. We're absolutely drowning in it.
Yeah.
The problem isn't scarcity, it's overload. And the new censorship, it isn't blocking stuff. It's spreading misinformation or just burying the important stuff under mountains of noise and distraction.
That same Mexican town today, if you've got a smartphone, boom. Wikipedia, news feeds, TED Talks, online courses, more data than anyone could possibly process.
And that's the trap.
Exactly, because you're immediately hit with conflicting stories, half-truths, stuff designed to just confuse you. It's incredibly hard to know what's reliable. And let's be honest, when you're faced with something complex, climate change, global economics, whatever, it's just so easy to click away. Find a cat video, check celebrity gossip, anything but wrestle with the hard stuff.
So the really crucial point the sources are making is, in this world, the absolute last thing teachers need to give students is more information. We're overloaded already.
Precisely. What's desperately needed now is the ability to make sense of it all, to figure out what matters and what doesn't, and maybe the most important thing, to weave all those little bits of data together into a bigger picture, a coherent view of the world. Now, okay, that's always been an ideal in education, right? Developing understanding. But schools have often been, well, a bit slack on that. They give the data.
And just sort of hope students figure out how to connect the dots themselves.
Kind of, yeah. But the sources argue pretty strongly that we've run out of time for that kind of passive hope. The decisions coming up, they're going to shape the future of life itself. We need that synthesized worldview now.
Okay, so that's the information overload issue. What's the second big problem the sources point to?
The other major thing is the focus on teaching very specific, predetermined technical skills. Like solving differential equations, coding in C plus Y, identifying chemical compounds, learning Mandarin.
And this goes back to that uncertainty about the future job market we talked about.
Exactly. You could spend years getting really good at C++ or Chinese. But what happens in 2050 if AI can code circles around humans? Or if translation apps let you have a perfect conversation with anyone, anywhere, instantly.
Hmm. Your hard-earned skills might just evaporate.
They could become obsolete. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so if specific technical skills are such a risky bet, what should we be teaching? What do the sources suggest?
Well, the consensus from a lot of education experts, the one cited here, points towards what they often call the four
The
C's:
four C's.
critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity.
Okay.
But maybe even broader than that, the big recommendation is a major shift away from narrow technical skills and towards general purpose life skills.
General purpose life skills. What does
Yeah.
that actually look like in practice for this kind of future?
It means skills that are valuable no matter what the tech or the job market looks like. And the most important ones identified are things like the ability to deal with constant change, the ability to learn new things effectively, and crucially, the ability to keep your mental balance when things get unfamiliar or, frankly, weird.
Keep your mental balance. That sounds important.
The sources put it really powerfully. To keep up with the world of 2050, you won't just need to invent new ideas or new gadgets. Above all, you'll need to reinvent yourself again and again.
Reinvent yourself. Wow, that's
Yeah.
a big idea. It feels like the pace of change isn't just about the economy anymore. It's about the very meaning of being human, potentially shifting.
Mhm.
Reminds me of that old quote, all that is solid melts into air from 1848. The sources suggest by 2048 that might apply to our bodies and minds too, melting into data.
It's a useful metaphor. Think about the contrast. A worker in 1848 during the Industrial Revolution, big change for them, maybe moving from a farm to a city factory. But they weren't likely changing gender identity, they weren't getting implants giving them new senses, and their factory job, probably for life. Now picture 2048. You might be migrating to cyberspace, not just a new city. Gender might be fluid or irrelevant. You might have tech implants giving you senses we can't even imagine now. And your job, it could vanish every 10 years because an algorithm does it better, forcing you to completely change track, change your identity.
Like that really vivid, almost sci-fi example the sources use. You're 25, working in fashion, identify as female, straight, looking for dates online. Then maybe at 35, you're gender non-specific, you've had some age adjustment tech, you spent most of your brain time in a virtual world called New Cosmos designing virtual fashion. And by 45, maybe dating is obsolete. An algorithm just finds or creates your perfect match, and you look back at your old designs and cringe because algorithms do it infinitely better.
And again, it's really important not to take those specific scenarios literally. They're illustrations. The sources are clear. Any detailed prediction of 2050 that doesn't sound like science fiction is probably wrong.
Right. It's the principle that matters.
Exactly. The specifics are fuzzy, but the core takeaway is crystal clear. Fundamental, radical change itself is the only thing we can be certain about.
And that kind of constant deep change completely breaks the old model of life, doesn't it? You know, the one where you learn for a while, get your info, skills, worldview, identity sorted, and then you work for a long time just applying that stuff, maybe tweaking it a bit, like learning to farm rice when you're 15 and you're set.
Yeah, that model is just obsolete,
Yeah.
especially with accelerating change and longer lifespans coming in the mid-21st century. Life won't have that kind of continuity. So that question, who am I? It stops being something you maybe figure out young and then you're done. It becomes this urgent, really complicated question you have to keep asking over and over.
Which sounds incredibly stressful. I mean, change is stressful, even small stuff. And let's face it, after a certain age, most people really don't like big changes. A teenager. Their whole life has changed. Body, mind, relationships, everything's shifting. It can be scary, sure, but also kind of exciting. You're inventing yourself.
But by 50, most people want stability. They've spent decades building their skills, career, identity, their view of how the world works. The last thing they want is to tear it all down and start again. The sources even mention neurological reasons. The adult brain is just less flexible, less plastic than a teenager's, rewiring deep-seated beliefs and habits. That's hard work.
But you can't afford stability anymore. Is that the message?
That seems to be the uncomfortable truth. If you just try to hold on to what you know, you risk being left behind. Becoming, as the source puts it, a clueless fossil, potentially for decades with longer life. You have to keep learning, keep reinventing, even at 50, 60, 70.
Because the world is becoming fundamentally stranger. With super smart AI, engineered bodies, algorithms designed to manipulate us, climate chaos, jobs disappearing, your past experience just isn't a reliable map anymore.
Which leads to these huge, difficult questions. How do you act rightly in a situation no human has ever encountered before? How do you make decisions when you're just flooded with information, much of it contradictory or junk? How do you just live when profound uncertainty isn't a temporary problem, but just the way things are?
Yeah, and to cope with that, to maybe even thrive, the sources say you need huge amounts of mental flexibility and great reserves of emotional balance. You've got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, letting go of the known, and feeling okay, even at home, in the unknown, repeatedly.
And this is where it gets really tricky from an education standpoint, right? How do you actually teach resilience? How do you build emotional balance in someone? It's way harder than teaching physics equations or historical dates. And, the teachers themselves, they're products of the old system too. They might not have that flexibility themselves.
Yeah, speaking of the old system, the sources are pretty blunt about that production line theory of education we inherited. You know, the factory model, concrete building, identical rooms, bells, kids sorted only by age, adults talking at them.
It's easy to poke fun at it now, and yeah, most agree it's basically bankrupt for the future we're facing. But, and this is a big but, finding a viable alternative that works at scale for everyone, not just rich kids in fancy suburbs. That's the huge challenge. We don't really have that yet.
So given that reality, maybe you're a young person stuck in a school that feels outdated. The sources offer some stark advice. Don't rely too much on the adults.
It sounds harsh, I know, but the logic is important. Most adults, they mean well, genuinely, but they often just don't grasp the speed and the depth of the changes happening. So what they offer as timeless wisdom might actually just be outdated bias, formed in a world that doesn't really exist anymore.
Okay, so if not the adults, rely on technology instead.
Yeah.
AI tutors, the internet.
Uh-oh. The sources warn that's an even riskier bet, potentially much riskier. Look, technology can be an amazing tool if you know what you want, if you're in control. But if you're uncertain, if you don't really know yourself or your goals, technology is incredibly good at shaping those goals for you, subtly taking the reins.
Like the agriculture example they use. It boosted human power overall, made elites rich, but enslaved most farmers.
Exactly. So you have to ask, are people glued to their phones controlling the tech, or is the tech controlling them? It's a serious question for all of us.
All right, so not adults, not tech. What about just relying on yourself? Follow your heart. Trust your gut.
That sounds good, doesn't it? Very appealing. But the sources argue it doesn't really work that well in practice for most people because, honestly, most of us don't know ourselves very well. Not really. That inner voice. It's usually a mashup of external stuff, cultural biases, propaganda we absorbed, advertising jingles, maybe even our gut bacteria influencing our mood. It's not some pure, authentic signal from deep inside.
And this is where it gets really concerning according to the sources. Because as biotech and machine learning get better and better, it becomes much easier to manipulate people's deepest feelings and desires, and much more dangerous. It'll get harder and harder to tell the difference between what feels like you and what's actually an external influence to system. Coke, Amazon, Baidu, the government knowing exactly which strings to pull.
That's exactly what they mean by the era of hacking humans. It's not just computers or bank accounts anymore. It's us, our operating system.
I mean, algorithms are already watching us constantly. Where we go, what we buy, who we talk to online.
And the next step, monitoring everything, your steps, your breath, your heart rate, your facial microexpressions, your tone of voice. They'll use big data, massive amounts of information about us, and machine learning, algorithms learning from that data to build models that understand you, potentially, better than you understand yourself.
Which is a chilling thought.
It is, because once they know you that well, they could gain enormous power to predict, control, manipulate your choices, your feelings, maybe even your beliefs. You could end up living in a kind of personalized Matrix or Truman Show where your reality is subtly shaped for you without you even realizing it. The sources suggest authority itself might shift away from us towards whatever system understands us best.
Okay, so the sources seem to present two stark paths forward here. Path one, just go with it. Be happy ceding control. Let the algorithms take care of things, make decisions for you. Trust them.
That's one option. Or path two. If you want to keep some real agency, some control over your own life in the future, you have to race. You have to run faster than the algorithms, faster than Amazon, faster than the government surveillance. You have to get to know yourself before they do.
And how do you run fast in that race? The sources offer that really striking advice.
Yeah, don't take much luggage. Leave all your illusions behind. They are very, very heavy.
Wow. Okay, so we've had a really intense deep dive today looking at this huge challenge. How do we prepare for this future of just unprecedented change? How do we deal with Information overload, potential manipulation, the constant need to reinvent ourselves.
And we've seen how the skills that seem most crucial aren't those narrow technical ones, but things like critical thinking, communication, collaboration, creativity, and maybe especially that mental flexibility, that emotional balance, and above all, that deep, ongoing work of self-knowledge.
And it's clear this isn't just theory about schools, is it? This is about your life, our lives, our future.
Hmm.
How do you navigate a world that's getting incredibly good at understanding and maybe manipulating you?
Which really leaves us all with a final, pretty provocative thought to chew on, doesn't it? In this age where algorithms are literally racing to know your organic operating system better than you do, what does it actually mean, practically speaking, to take that ancient advice, know thyself? Given these stakes, where do you even start that journey today?